Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the United States Navy Memorial. On December 7th, 1941, 2,335 service members and 68 civilians died in an attack on U.S. forces at Pearl Harbor and elsewhere on the island of Oahu, Hawaii, forcing the United States to enter a war in the Pacific. Today, during the 79th anniversary of that date of infamy, we take this opportunity to honor and remember those who perished on that day. Our host for today's ceremony is Rear Admiral Carl Lottie, United States Navy 91st Commandant of Naval District, Washington. Accompanying Rear Admiral Lottie is Rear Admiral Frank Thorpe IV, U.S. Navy retired President and Chief Executive Officer, United States Navy Memorial Foundation. Guests, please rise for the arrival of the official party and remain standing for the presentation of colors, our national anthem, and the invocation. Present, Harps! Order, arms! Advance the colors! Present, Harps! Order, arms! Post the colors! Ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant Brandy Brown, Chaplain Corps, United States Navy, will now offer the invocation.
Will you pray with me, please? Almighty God, while I manned the rails sailing into port past Ford Island, my breath was stolen as I witnessed the sunken vessels below. I felt a motion mimicking a slight heart attack, but you were there. December 7th, 1941, the day that lives in infamy, changed the world as we knew it, and the very next day the U.S. joined the Second World War. But you, God, were there. Over 2,400 U.S. service members and citizens tragically lost their lives and over 1,000 more injured over a ferocious attack from a then unknown enemy force. But you were there. You provided supernatural strength to the Pearl Harbor defenders, men and women called to arms to defend the base and protect their assets, both human life and equipment, and assist the wounded and displaced. That day, 79 years ago, was wrought with tension, heartbreak, and confusion, and American citizens turned to you for consolation. Shortly after September 2nd, 1945, we, one nation under you, reached out to our enemies to offer an olive branch, for you are the God of reconciliation. You've always required us to love our enemies, to turn the other cheek, and to walk the extra mile. And thus, since 1945, we have done so. And relations are strong and trusting. Today, we honor and remember those who paid the ultimate sacrifice during the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor. And we acknowledge, like you were there then, you are here with us now. We are also humbled and appreciative of the peace you established and have grown between us and Japan these last 70 years. Thank you for the men and women who rise to support and defend this great nation and her Constitution, and I ask your continued blessing over us and the U.S. citizens we faithfully serve with honor, courage, and commitment. Amen.
Guests, please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Rear Admiral Frank Thorpe, U.S. Navy retired, President and Chief Executive Officer, Navy Memorial Foundation.
Welcome to the United States Navy Memorial as we honor and recognize those who served in Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. Chaplain Brown, thank you very much for that very moving prayer. And Rear Admiral Lottie, thank you for joining us for this wreath laying ceremony today. As we do with all our events, we are strictly conforming with all CDC, Washington, D.C., U.S. Navy, and U.S. Park Service guidelines to prevent the spread of COVID. Admiral Lottie and I will lay a wreath at the Lone Sailor today, and we are doing this today in the middle of this pandemic because this remembrance is just too important to not observe. Today is the 79th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. We call it Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day. As Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, it is a date that will live in infamy. We often think of Pearl Harbor as a day of a horrible surprise attack, of the carnage that was brought on to so many seagoing sailors that day, the death of so many people, and the injury of so many more, and the dramatic changes in so many people's lives. And that is appropriately so. But as history tells us, the attack on Pearl Harbor also led to the demonstration of the best of mankind, the best of America, and the best of the United States Navy. Today, we will remember one such sailor who rose to that occasion that day, December 7th, 1941, to save the lives of his fellow sailors. Petty Officer First Class Joe George, a crew member on the USS Vestal, which was tied up outboard of the USS Arizona as she suffered major explosions. Seeing 6 USS Arizona sailors trapped on the control tower above the navigation bridge of the USS Arizona, surely to perish in the flames, Petty Officer George threw a line, enabling them to climb hand over hand over the burning ship of the Arizona, over the burning water, and onto the vessel, the USS Vessel, to safety. Unfortunately, 2 of those sailors would later die from their burns, but 4 of them survived, going on to live full lives. 2 of those sailors, Lauren Bruner and Don Stratton, petitioned the Navy to recognize Petty Officer George, and his daughter Joanne Taylor took up the cause, leading to the posthumous recognition of Chief Petty Officer George with a Bronze Star with Combat V 2 years ago today. Joanne Taylor is joining us today from her home in Cabot, Arkansas. It is my honor to introduce a person who not only understands what heroism is, but committed herself to ensure that her father, her hero, our hero, Joe George, and his heroism was and is recognized.
Thank you, Admiral Thorpe. I want to thank you for that wonderful introduction. I so appreciate the honor and privilege of being able to speak about my father today on this 79th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. My father graduated from high school in 1934. He lived on a farm in Georgia, a working farm, and he was a very athletic man. And my father played varsity football, varsity basketball, and was very athletic. He was given a full football scholarship to Auburn University, but he wasn't able to accept that scholarship because his father needed him on the farm. And in July of 1935, my father got restless, and he joined the United States Navy. And after joining the Navy, out of boot camp, my father was assigned to the USS Vestal. And that was a repair ship, and that was his ship that he was assigned to. And he was on that ship in 1941 when he ended up at Pearl Harbor in Honolulu, Hawaii. My father was a boxer, and they used to call them smokers. Back in those days at Pearl Harbor, the sailors would have individuals that would represent their ship. And my father represented the USS Vestal. And he's very athletic and very strong, and he won his matches, and he was All-American. And he was involved, they called them smokers, but they were really boxing matches. On December 5th, 1941, my father's ship, the USS Vestal, it pulled in to Battleship Row. His ship was a repair ship, and his ship pulled in, and it moored outside the USS Arizona to make some repairs on the Arizona. On December 5th, my father, he had liberty, and he had a boxing match, one of those smokers that I talked about. He had a boxing match scheduled that evening. So him and his shipmates went to the boxing match. And of course, my father won. And he was always proud of that. And being young men at the time, like they were, they decided what a lot of the sailors did. They went to the bars. And my father and his shipmates went to bars. And being the way that my father was, he got in a fight with one of his shipmates, and the shore patrol was called. And the shore patrol came and picked my father up and took him back to the ship, and he was confined to the ship on December 5th for the weekend, that fateful weekend. And I always say it was God's divine providence that put my father in that situation on that particular night. He wanted my father back on the ship for that weekend, knowing what was going to happen a few days later. On December 7th, 1941, it was a beautiful day in Honolulu, Hawaii, typical beautiful day. It was a lot of sailors got up early in the morning. That's what they did. They got up early in the morning, and my father, particularly, he was awake early in the morning, and he was reading the newspaper. At 7:55 a.m. in the morning, General Quarters was sounded. He didn't hear anything, but General Quarters was sounded, and they knew that was to go to their battle stations. And he came up to the main deck, and he saw all chaos and hell breaking loose. The Japanese planes were flying so low that they could see the pilots' faces. They were shooting at them. They were dropping bombs. In fact, my father's ship, the USS Vestal, got hit by 2 bombs and had a 5-foot hole in his deck. in its deck. By the time my father got up on the deck, the Japanese planes had already flown over Hickam Field, bombing Hickam Field, bombing the Schofield barracks, and they were on their way to Battleship Row. And when he got up on the deck, they were already there bombing. What the USS Arizona had already been hit and turned over. The Japanese planes were flying so low, and they were dropping bombs, and many of those bombs were going under my father's ship. But a Japanese plane dropped a bomb into the middle of the USS Arizona, into their ammunition, 1,000,000 pounds of ammunition, and a major, horrible explosion. Just all hell broke loose. All chaos was going on. The USS Arizona lurched out of the water 30 feet. It was such an explosion from that 1,000,000 pounds of powder, and it lurched out of the water. And there were 1,177 men on that fateful morning that were killed probably by that horrible explosion. It created an raging inferno, a very black cloud all over the ship, raging fire. It was just chaos. Body parts were flying onto my father's ships. Parts of the Arizona were flying onto his ship. The harbor was filling with oil and fire and oil and body parts, and sharks were already gathering from this horrendous thing that was occurring there. And unbeknownst to my father, up in the director of the Arizona, there were 6 men that were in this director high, and they came out after that massive explosion to see this raging inferno and all of this chaos and fire and horror. They were burned so bad on their clothes were burned off, that their skin was melting off of them. They were peeling the skin from them. It was melting so bad. Their hands were charcoaled, like you see charcoal meat on a fire. They were just burned. They were gravely injured and so hurt. And they came out of the director, and they are in desperation, survival mode, trying to think, what are we going to do? As soon as they stepped out of the director, their boots were melting. It was just horrendous. The Japanese were strafing and bombing all of the time that this was going on. This big black plume that you see in the iconic pictures of the Arizona, it cleared just for a moment. As God would have it, it cleared just for a moment. And these 6 men were able to see a lone sailor down on the USS Vestal, who happened to be my father, Joe George. And they hollered and they screamed, and they, as loud as they could, they were in desperate survival mode. And my father, but by God's grace, saw these men up there, and he just subconsciously clicked into helping these men survive. That's all he thought about. He was cutting the lines because the Arizona was pulling his ship down, and it was sinking rapidly, and his ship was being pulled under with the Arizona. So he had a fire axe and was cutting the lines when this occurred, when he saw them. And he put the fire axe down, and he was a 26-year-old sailor that was a boatswain mate. And so he knew about ropes and stuff, and he got a heaving line and threw a heaving line with a monkey fist 70 feet across and 30 feet up in the air. And one of the sailors, Alvin DeVore, on the USS Arizona, caught the line and secured it onto the Arizona. And my father secured the line on his side. It's been said he put it around his waist and held it. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But he secured the line on his side. And these men got on the line and began, and they were terrified. And it was horrible because they were going over this line, which was a long ways down, and fire underneath them. And it was just, and they were gravely injured. And they went over the line, fist, hand over hand, one at a time. My father's executive officer came up at some point in that, and he was thinking about his ship, I'm sure, and his ship was sinking, and he told my father to cut the lines while one of the sailors was on the line. My father just disobeyed that order and didn't do that. He went on saving those lives of those men, and he kept encouraging them to come down. They got on the other onto the Vestal, and they were put on transport ships over to a hospital ship. They were burned on 80% of their body. It was just horrible what happened to them and the horrible chaos. And all the time they're going across the lines, and all the time that my father's doing this, they're being bombed and they're being strafed, and all this horror is going on in their side. But they got them safely to a hospital ship on the other side, and my father just did what he did on that day. That was the right thing to do. It saved those men's lives. And my father just, once they got them on ships, he just went about his day, the rest of the day, putting out fires on his ship, doing whatever he had to do after this horrible, horrible chaos that occurred on December 7th. My father never told my mother and my sister and I about saving any men off of the USS Arizona. It's kind of funny, but all that my father told my mother and my sister and I, we knew that my father was at Pearl Harbor when the war began and that he was in that horrible battle. We knew that my father was on the USS Vestal, but that's all that we knew. We did not know that my father had saved anybody. He never talked about that. He never mentioned that. He didn't really talk a whole lot about the war, but he certainly never talked about saving anybody's life or doing anything like that. So my mother and my sister and I knew nothing about what my father did about saving those 6 men. And those 6 men were Don Stratton, Lauren Bruner, Alvin DeVore, Carol Kuhn, Russell Lott, and Earl Reiner. Those are the 6 men that my father saved on that day. Don Stratton and Lauren Bruner, the 75th anniversary of Pearl Harbor was coming up. And they were writing books previous to that. Both of them were writing a book. And the story began to come out because of them writing the book. And so I was amazed and astonished. And I mean, there's no words to be able to tell you how it felt to hear what your father had done. I never knew anything about what he had done about rescuing people, and to find out that there were 5 survivors, only 5 survivors left off the USS Arizona from that fateful day, and that 2 of them were ones that my father saved. It was just incredible. And so, of course, I wanted to do everything possible to help see my father recognized. We went to the 75th anniversary, my husband and I did, and we met the Stratton family. And we met Don and Lauren. It was the first time that I ever met any of these people. I knew a little bit about the story, and of course, more and more came out about the story, but what my fathers did. And also, we were able to get in touch with some people that could maybe help us with this quest to get my father recognized for this. I met a young man named Lieutenant J.G. Matt Previs. And he was an intelligence officer in the Navy, and he offered to help me try to find a way to get my father recognized. So my husband and I went home from the 75th anniversary, and Matt contacted me right away, and he said, "Joanne, you need to get your father's records from the National Archive." And I did exactly what Matt told me, and I got my father's records from the National Archives. It took pretty long time. It took 60 days. But the day that I got them, I faxed them to Matt. And Matt went through my father's records. And in there, Matt found the most amazing thing that started. This is my father's personal logbook. This is what they used back in those days. They didn't have the computers to put things on. They put stuff in their little logbook. And in here, you'll see an entry. You can see this paragraph. And it's entered in there by Cassin Young, the commander of my father's ship, the first Medal of Honor winner of the war, of the World War II, he was. And entered in that logbook that I just showed you states that my father saved 6 people off of the USS Arizona, and that he also helped cut the lines to get the USS Vestal free of the Arizona and to save his ship. And this was entered in his logbook. And so we had an audience set up with some senators. My father's Senator Cotton, Senator Gardner, Senator Flake, and Senator Mike Lee. They met with us, and Don and Lauren told the story of what my father did on that day to these senators. And we also got an audience with the Defense Department, with the Secretary of Defense, General Mattis, Secretary of the Navy, Admiral Richardson, and Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dunsford. They met with us, and they were so kind to Don and Lauren. And they told their story to these gentlemen about what my father did and what occurred on that day. And they were just, it was a beautiful experience listening to them tell their stories. And another beautiful experience that we had while we were there, we had an audience with the president. President Trump had us to the Oval Office to specifically hear the story about Joe George. And of course, to me, that was very moving to be able to know that we were going to be in the presence of the President of the United States and hear him tell what he knew about my father. Then on November 11th, Veterans Day, 2017, the most wonderful thing happened. Senator Cory Gardner went to Don Stratton's house in Colorado Springs just to visit with him and spend Veterans Day with him. And he spent a wonderful afternoon with Don Stratton and his family. And they just bonded and they just spent a lovely afternoon together talking about many things, personal and otherwise. And at the end of the visit, Don Stratton said to Senator Gardner, "I don't understand why you can't recognize Joe George for what he did. And he told him he deserves the medal for what he did." And Cory Gardner was going back to Washington, D.C. that weekend, and he promised Don Stratton in that moment that when he got back, he would call the president and be sure to talk to the president, and he did just that. And then, amazingly, a couple weeks later, the Navy Department called me, and they told me, "Joanne, we have a medal for your father, the Bronze Star with Valor." And so the Navy Department, Secretary of the Navy wrote a letter and said, help her receive this medal, present this medal to her posthumously, however she wants that done. And so the Navy Department and the National Park Service they got in touch with me and arranged that we could have the medal presented to me posthumously on the USS Arizona Memorial, something that had never been done before for anyone. On December 7th, on that glorious morning, I was presented the medal posthumously for my father, the Bronze Medal with Valor, with Lauren Bruner and Don Stratton standing on each side of me. We cried many tears. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining in just a spectacular way on the memorial. It was just beautiful, and Don and Lauren and I cried tears of happiness and joy, and also emotional tears for all we had been through trying to get to this point. It was just a beautiful moment in time that will never be forgotten. And it was also Don Stratton and Lauren Bruner's last time on the USS Arizona together again. They stayed behind and spent a few minutes on the Arizona together, just the two shipmates. It was their last time ever being on the memorial alive again together. I want to thank you so much for letting me tell my father's story today. Truly, I am grateful that you would hear his story today. And I would like to be with you there at the Navy Memorial with the lone sailor. But I'm not able to do that today, but I thank you for hearing his story. I have deep honor and gratitude that you're hearing it today. Thank you so much for that.
Rear Admiral Thorpe and Rear Admiral Lottie will now place a wreath by the Lone Sailor statue in remembrance of those Americans who perished on December 7th, 1941, and for all our servicemen and women who silently remain on watch, having given their lives for our country. Guests, please rise. Advance the colors. Present. Arms. Order. Arms. Retire the colors.
Very well.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our ceremony. Thank you for joining us today.